What's up, team? This is Ro, your best friend at JMSB. So here I was asked a question for COMM 305, Introduction to Managerial Accounting. Let's have a look. Montreal Manufacturing Inc. has the following cost and production data for the month of April. Beginning work in process, 17,900 units. Started in production or transferred in, 104,000 units. Completed production or transferred out, 91,600. Ending work in process, 3,300 units. The beginning inventory was 60% complete for conversion costs. The ending inventory was 40% complete for conversion costs. Materials are added at the beginning of the process, and the costs pertaining to the month of April are as follows. So we're offered the material, direct labor, and factory overhead costs for our beginning inventory, and we're also offered the same categories for the current month. In required 1, we're hoping to calculate the equivalent units of production for materials and for conversion costs for the month of April using the first in, first out method. So under the first in, first out method, the way that we evaluate the equivalent units is by first setting up a schedule where we reconcile the physical units. So we have beginning work in process inventory, physical units 17,900. We know that the ending work in process is 30,300. And one concept that we have to calculate are the units that are started and completed. The way that we calculate started and completed is simply by taking away from all the units that are transferred out the beginning work in process. So 91,600 less 17,900 is going to be the units that are started and completed. So 73,700 units. And now if we tally all of these up, this is going to give us a total of the physical units that we have. Understand that equivalent units are calculated based on the percentage of costs that are being added in the current time period. So for example, with respect to materials, we can see that costs are added at the beginning of the process. So in the current time period, we would have added 0% of the cost to our beginning work in process simply because 100% of the cost would have been incurred in the prior period. And so the equivalent units for materials is going to be 0. But for conversion costs, the beginning inventory is 60% complete, and so you should be able to argue that in the current time period, in the month of April, we added 40% of the cost to these units. And so 17,900 times 40% is how we'd get the equivalent units for beginning inventory with respect to our conversion costs. Units that are started and completed are obviously 100% complete in the current time period, and so for both materials and conversion costs, these guys are simply going to be the same amount, the same as our physical units. The ending work in process with respect to materials is going to be 100% complete, and that's simply because the costs are being added at the beginning of the process, and so as soon as these units came into existence, we added 100% of the cost for materials, so the equivalent units are going to be the same as the physical units. With respect to conversion costs, however, because the ending inventory was only 40% complete, we can argue that the equivalent units is 30,300 times 0.4, so 12,120. And now if we add these up, we can get the total equivalent units for materials, 104,000. We can also get the total equivalent units for conversion costs, 92,980. So this should really answer required 1. The answer that they're looking for are the total equivalent units for materials and for conversion costs. So let's have a look at required 2. In required 2, we're asked to calculate the unit cost for materials, the unit cost for conversion, and the total unit manufacturing cost for a product. Under the FIFO method, in this step, you're only looking at the current costs that have happened in April. You're not looking at any of the costs that pertains to your beginning inventory. So for materials, the current cost is $598,000. And for conversion, we're really just going to add up the direct labor and the factory overhead simply because those two items together are called conversion costs. So $195,200 plus $399,872 is how I get the total for the current cost for conversion, $595,072. Now from our prior step, we have already calculated the equivalent units. We know that for materials, the equivalent units is 104,000. For conversion, the equivalent units are 92,980. And now to calculate the unit cost, we're simply going to divide the current cost for April by the total number of equivalent units. So 598 divided by 104, we'd get $5.75 for materials. With the same logic, we can divide the current cost for conversion by the number of equivalent units and obtain the unit cost for conversion. If we add up these two unit costs together, the DM and the conversion, this is going to offer us the total unit manufacturing cost. So in required 2, the answers that they're looking for are these unit manufacturing costs that we've just computed. Let's have a look at required 3. In required 3, we're hoping to assign the costs, so we want to be able to come up with the total cost of our beginning inventory, the cost of completing beginning WIP, the cost of the units that are started and completed, the cost of the units that are transferred out, and the cost of our ending WIP. And of course, we're hoping to do this for each category of cost and in total. So for our beginning inventory, we can obtain the cost for materials. This data has been offered in the problem itself. We know that it's 64,100 for materials. For conversion, we're going to add up the direct labor and the factory overhead for our beginning WIP, which is 20,900 plus 15,400, so a total of 36,300. Adding up the material and the conversion cost, we have the total cost of the beginning WIP. We now want to figure out what are the costs that are incurred to complete the beginning WIP. Notice that the equivalent units for materials is 0 for beginning work in process inventory, and therefore we're not assigning any material cost. For conversion, we have 7,160 units. The unit conversion cost is 6.4, so the cost of completing beginning WIP for conversion is just 6.4 times 7,160, so 45,824. If we add these two guys together, we're going to get the total cost of completing the beginning WIP. Now for the units that are started and completed, we see that for materials and conversion costs, it's the same, it's 73,700, and this should really always be the case because started and completed units are 100% complete in the current time period. So to assign cost to these units, we can multiply 73,700 by the cost of DM by 5.75 to assign cost for materials. We can repeat that. We can multiply the equivalent units for conversion by the unit conversion cost of 6.4, and we can add these two guys together, or we can just take the equivalent units and multiply it by the unit manufacturing cost of 12.15 to get the total cost of started and completed. Once we've done this, we can add up the costs going down to determine the cost of the units that are transferred out. And now finally, we want to value the ending work in process. So the logic is really the same. From required 1, you grab the equivalent units. From required 2, you grab the unit costs. You multiply them to assign costs. So for materials, we have 30,300 equivalent units. We multiply this by 5.75 to assign some cost for materials. We want to do the same with our conversion costs. So 12,120 multiplied by 6.4, you'll get the total for your conversion costs. If you add up these two, you're going to get the total cost of your ending work in process. And now finally, we can add up the costs of the units that are transferred out and the ending work in process to get the total cost that is accounted for. We can repeat this for materials and conversion, and we'll be able to get the totals for those categories as well. So there we have it. This should be the response for required 3. So I hope this explanation helps, and if it does, make sure you tag your friends that are taking COMM 305, let them know about the group, and in the meantime guys, study well, keep practicing, row out.